I also don't like to punish people who are on time, and I already have. So let's start. This is not the first meeting of the Jersey City Java user group. It's the first meeting of the Jersey City Java user group that I have ever been a part of. I'm sure it existed for a long time beforehand, but I didn't know about it, even though I have lived in the New York area for a while. But one of my colleagues brought to my attention that it had been without an organizer for a few months. And so I thought, I'm an independent consultant. A meetup is the kind of thing that I could stand to be involved with. And so I took it, but then there was this pandemic thing. I'm actually not in the United States for the last 6 months, and I don't know when I'll be back there. And then we had a baby. And so I took on organizership in February and already agreed with GeePaw that he would speak at the first meeting. And then the first meeting became now. So I hope you can forgive me. I hope you weren't waiting for the Jersey City Java user group to start instantly. But here we are. And normally we will have meetups that are specifically more Java more often. This one is not precisely Java, but like our next month's presenter, which we have lined up, and I'll send an announcement shortly after this, will be more specifically Java. He's a well-known Java speaker. GeePaw is too, but he's speaking about something else today. And the topic next month will be more traditionally Java, the kind of thing you'd find at a jug. But I thought for our first meetup, we should have, first of all, I'll say more about him in a moment, but one of the leading lights to my eyes in this field, talking about something that is not specific to any programming language. Um, so, oh yeah, and I wanna say again, if you do not want to be recorded, turn your camera off, turn your sound off. If it offends you to have your name on the screen, change your name to something else. Do that now, so that I don't have to blur it for very long in the video editor. And we're going to post this on YouTube afterward, and I'll post the video link in the meetup event afterward. So if you're on this event, then you should get that notification afterward. Is anybody here like actually in the New York metropolitan area, just out of curiosity? If you are, say something in the chat. I'll be
Yeah, I'm
pleasantly
here
surprised.
in New Jersey, and I'm part of the Garden State Jug and New York Jug.
Okay, so I may be leaning on you for how things are done around there.
I hope you
Thanks
do.
for letting me know. Thanks for letting me know, Barry. Anybody else say something in the chat? Okay. Yeah, let's talk more about this GeePaw guy for just a second. So what we're going to talk about today, as I understand it, is about how change happens in a complex socio-technical kind of system, because that's GeePaw's kind of thing. But also that is informed by other things that have been GeePaw's kind of thing. So for example, programming in Java pretty often, XP, extreme programming, and all the things that go with it. You may know him from various and sundry opinions that he's had over the years. He's certainly somebody that I've learned a hell of a lot from. And so I'm very excited to bring you, for our first speaker of the Jersey City Java user group, Michael D. GeePaw Hill. Over to you.
Thank you, Amitai, for the nice introduction. Hi, folks. I see a lot of remarkably familiar names and even some familiar faces. It's very nice to see you all. It really is. I was really delighted when Amitai asked me to do this. I'm really into the user group movement. You know, I've been a geek for 40 years, and you know, in the 1980s, users groups were so important to helping me meet people and get ideas and try things out that I hadn't been willing to try, would never have thought of by myself. And so I'm a real believer in that movement. And I was very happy to come and see you all today. And I'm also especially delighted to see so many folks here that I know, because it apparently means that you haven't given up on me yet. That's very kind. Today, what I want to talk about is change. Specifically change in the context of what we do for a living, which is change things, and about some ideas I have that are based in something called change harvesting theory, and to make for you a proposition that I'm hoping that you'll find, well, a little disturbing, but still of value to you. I have a mutual on Twitter, and about 6, maybe 7 weeks into the quarantine, she made a grand announcement on Twitter that she was going to, so she had nothing better to do because she's a professional chef. And she's been a professional chef for 25 years, and she's so bored. And so she has decided that she is going to write the complete encyclopedia of what she has learned in 25 years of cooking professionally as a tweet stream. So I'm not a chef by any stretch. In fact, I hardly cook at all. But I was fascinated by this. It's like, okay, let's go. So her entire tweet stream was one tweet with 2 sentences in it. Sentence 1, that's too much rice. Sentence 2, that's not enough garlic. And of course, I cracked up, right? I cracked up, but it got me thinking because, there is advice like that that doesn't cover every possible circumstance. That's hardly universal instruction. Nevertheless, if you're in the early days of learning to cook, those are 2 really important principles. That's too much rice and that's not enough garlic. And I just smiled and I started thinking about me and my life and what I have learned. As I say, I've been a professional programmer for 40 years, and I still am. I still code every day, pretty much. And for the last 2 decades of that time, I've also been a coach. I'm a software development coach. I don't characterize myself as agile. I don't have a particular flavor or school. I just travel around, or nowadays travel around remotely, and I talk to teams and I work with them for a while down on the ground and get a feel for where they're at and what they want to try next, and I help them find ways to try it. And so if you asked me for my corollary to her awesome piece of advice, that corollary would be this: you should probably take many more much smaller steps. And that's it. That's really the whole talk, except that's a little short for users group talk. So let's elaborate on what I'm getting at, why I'm suggesting that as, oh my God, I just got big on my screen. I was doing so well. That's pretty interesting advice to give, and to give it blind without even knowing you folks, without even knowing your project, without even knowing whether you're actually trying to bake chocolate chip cookies. Too much rice, not enough garlic. I'm saying those steps are too big. I'm not going to be able to prove that to you today. And so I'm not going to try to prove it to you today. Instead, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take something that I'm sure some of you will regard as an impossible statement, and I'm going to show you that it's not actually insane. It's not an insane idea. There are real reasons for us to be saying that. The statement looks kind of like this. I'll probably do some live drawing for you really badly here in a little bit, but I already drew this up just to get us started. Most of you are used to either in your current organization or just in your own life, used to a style of approaching changes that is called the RAT, R-A-T, rework avoidance theory. And what it says is that the efficient way to make your software, and I'll tell you this now, this is really about all sorts of change, not just about changing code. It actually applies to changing programs, changing products, changing processes. That's the change harvesting part, which really I'm just going to touch on at the very end of the talk. But the efficient way to go from A to B looks like this. We'll take a really straight line, we'll break it into some parts, which we'll call steps, and we'll run along that line and go from A to B. And by contrast, What I want to show you is something that comes from what I call change harvesting theory. And it looks much more like this. And what you can obviously see about this is two things right away. The individual steps here are very small. In fact, they're of almost identical size. So that's one important thing to notice about that, a really important one from change harvesting. And the second thing you'll notice is that they don't go in a straight line. They don't go in a perfectly straight line. Those two facts are actually closely related. They have to do with the fact that I am constraining my steps to be extremely small. And the unlikely idea that I'm going to try to convince you of, or at least get you started thinking about today, is the idea that this one, the CHT one, is actually generally more efficient than the RAT one. The CHT is more efficient than the RAT, even though the RAT has this beautiful crystal clear line that makes it look, oh, so tight and good and so optimally efficient. So what are these short lines? They're steps. And before we go really any deeper than this, we should talk about what I mean by a step. Here's a little live action drawing here. A step is a pretty straightforward thing, and it has a before and a during and an after. Here's a pro tip. If you're ever doing presentations, never look at the screen while you're trying to draw. I draw extremely poorly already. Trying to do it while watching the screen makes it even worse. We have a before, and then we have a during, and then we have an after. And I'm drawing this out as a line to express the idea that some amount of time is spent in this middle state, in between the before and the after. Another way to think of it is to say, this is what we have, and this is what we want. All right. And there's a really important distinction to be made between these three situations, because here we are ready. And here we are ready. But in here, during this during time, we're not ready. Which raises the question, of course, what do you mean by ready? Well, remember that change harvesting theory actually has to do with change in general, not just what we do for a living. But what we do for a living is we change code. And if you're going to change code for a living, then ready has a fairly specific meaning. I'm going to introduce you to this concept. Don't lock your head too tight around it yet. Shippable. Here, I'm shippable in the before. And here, I'm shippable in the after. But here, I'm not. Now, I want to make two jiggles to most people's gut reaction to the idea of shippability. When I say shippable, all I mean is the same or better. Now, if you think about that, if you think about your organizations, it's like we're actually flipping the logic from being greater than to being not less than. That's the difference between before shippable and after shippable for my particular illustration. All right. So that's the one thing. It doesn't have to be better. It has to be the same or better in order to constitute a successful step. Now, what do I mean by shippable? Well, some of you folks probably write firmware that rides around in cars, and shipping is a very big deal. Others of you probably write live websites, and shipping is a pretty easy deal. But further, some of you probably write medical software, and shipping means massive amounts of training that have to be applied to the field in order to accept any sort of change. I get all that, and I want you to take all of that and push it to the side. Instead, I'm going to give you a magic button that sits down in the corner of the screen. And when you're working on code, at any point, you can push that button. And right now, what you have is in the field, you have the last before, right? You've got the before is running in the field. It's live right now. And when you press that button, which is called the Ship Me button, instantly, automatically, the field will be running the after version of your software, not the before. There is no associated cost. There's no training. There's no market readiness. We would say then that you are ready if you, who actually made the change, are willing to push that button. If you're not willing to push it, you're not shippable and it ain't ready. And if you are willing to push it, then you are shippable and you are ready. So that is what I mean when I talk about a step. It's this thing. It's before and it's during and it's after. It's having one thing, wanting another. It's going from ready to unready to ready, which in the context of shipping code or of making code means going from shippable to not shippable to shippable. All right, with that as our background, in this first picture that we looked at, rework avoidance theory is obsessed with the slogan, doing the same thing twice is inefficient. And it isn't just one tiny idea. It's actually a huge cluster of related concepts, a huge body of logic that tells us this. If you're accustomed to the idea of frames, then the frame that we're in is a frame that is some faint, vague mixture of erecting a skyscraper and running a foot race. And these steps are of arbitrary length, and each one lies perfectly along the optimal path to getting to that skyscraper, to being able to finish, to walk away. And for most of us, we were raised in a theory that says that not only is doing the same thing twice inefficient, which is actually a perfectly useful slogan, but also changing the same code twice is inefficient. Ooh, and that is the heart of rework avoidance theory. Now, rework avoidance theory is perfectly logical. We've got a bunch of premises. We combine them to form intermediate conclusions, and we combine those in turn to form final conclusions, and we wind up with a brilliant crystalline structure that tells us how to structure and plan and execute our work. The only problem is sometimes in some situations, and I'm going to call out a couple of those situations in particular, the premises are flawed. And when the premises are flawed, necessarily so are the conclusions. All right. All the difficulty in the rat is at the beginning, and all the reward is at the end. Now, if the beginning is just 15 minutes away from the end, that doesn't represent much of a problem. If the beginning is 15 months away from the end, it represents quite a problem. Why? Because you have to have incredibly high knowledge of that faraway target that you're aiming for, about your destination. In fact, we call that kind of target a city on the hill. It exists in mind space, very far away from where you are right now. The city on the hill is a reference to American history. And Jonathan Edwards, a Puritan preacher in the 17th century, I think, coined the phrase to describe what they were building in New England, which was a city on the hill. And the incredible requirement for high knowledge is important because, of course, these cities are very complex. And little tiny details can make gigantic differences in them. And since we're aiming for a straight line, perfectly optimized path, that means we need to nail down all of those details. Second problem, with that difficulty being at the beginning and the reward all at the end, storing up enough value to pull it off. Think of yourself as a swimmer. You know, it's no big deal to store up enough air to swim for 30 seconds. Practically all of us here, although not necessarily all of us, could do that. It's a little bit harder to swim underwater for 3 minutes. It's completely impossible to do it for 30 minutes. And yet, a 15-month-away target is extraordinarily difficult to pull together a year and change worth of value and hold it aside and then carry it with you for 15 months. Third thing is, I already touched on this. Maybe it's not a third thing. Maybe I'm duplicating myself. Oh, here's another pro tip. You probably should not dramatically rewrite your talk within an hour of actually giving it. Anyway, it requires every trace of ambiguity to be eliminated. So what does that cause us to do when we have faraway targets? Well, it causes us to spend a great deal of time. Winnie the Pooh sat down to think. And we think, and we think, and we think, and we think, and we think. And we build elaborate structures in our head, and we don't act. It also raises the stakes of every decision we make while we're thinking, because the cost of one of those mistakes is likely to be that we will never reach the city on the hill at all. So that's one big flaw in rework avoidance theory. Second one. Notice, by the way, before I go on to the second one, actually, I guess we're going to lead right into it. This has to do with the effects of scale. And what we're really talking about here is this duration. The basic structure of a step is pretty unavoidable. They all work that way. What we're now arguing about is what's a good time for the duration of those steps. And now we enter the second flaw. It is a commonplace for people to reason that the size of a step and the effort of a step are linear. When you map one to the other, the line goes up in a very straight as I can draw it, line. Step size and step effort are not, in fact, related linearly. Further, the limits that you hit with these curves are dramatic and organic. The real curve will actually have a dramatic shape that looks like this. It starts and it's linear for a very short stretch, and then it starts to climb. And it actually climbs faster, rather rapidly. Why? Why is that? It's because the key factor in our ability to successfully look ahead is our ability to think. Our ability to hold concepts in our head and keep them alive and awake and open to us, and then manipulate them in our head space. The key factor then is, it has another name, our mental bandwidth. In 1954, a guy named George Miller, who was a professor of psychiatry. Now, I don't even remember his discipline. It might have just been straight psychology, but he was working on trying to find out what the hell is intelligence. And so he had all these grad students running around conducting all these experiments. And he started looking at all their results, very different sorts of experiments. And a number kept popping up to him. And he wrote a very famous paper. He wrote the paper after he actually gave the lecture, which is something I'll do too. and it's called The Magic Number 7 plus or minus 2. Because this number between 5 and 9 kept showing up in his data over and over and over again. And he started wondering, what is that number? And he proposed that what he was looking at was the mental bandwidth of a human being. That the mental bandwidth, the ability to hold unrelated concepts in your head and manipulate them successfully, is somewhere between 5 items and 9 items. That was what? Not quite 70 years ago. And since then, not only have his experiments, but literally tens of thousands of other experiments have been conducted trying to look for that number and determine what it is. And the universal consensus of all the people who study it, who are now called cognitive scientists, and he would have been called a cognitive scientist too, but that term hadn't really been developed yet, is that he was totally wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Definitely not 5 to 9. Their data says the magic number is 5 plus or minus 1. He overestimated how good people are at holding unrelated things in their head. And he underestimated how good we are at taking things and hiding them using a bunch of techniques from ourselves. Techniques like labeling things, chunking is a key one, stacking. These are the sorts of things that humans do to manage problems of that scale. These are extraordinarily effective techniques, but all they do is extend our reach a little. They take us from the low from the low 1 digit to the low 2 digits. They don't take us any further. Does anybody in this room have an app that they're shipping right now that only has the low 2 digits of entities in it? Yeah. You see what I'm getting at? Step size is limited by our ability to hold all the things we need in our head to do that step. And no amount of try harder will help. All right. Next mistake, next flaw in rework avoidance theory is to not recognize that steps, and here's my close-up picture of one step compared to several small ones. Steps actually bring intrinsic value. Remember when we said a step is same or better? Why did I make that? I'm so sorry for this noisy phone. Why did I make that? Die. Very good. Why did I make that point about same or better? The reason is because it is the requirement to always be better. That's about a certain kind of value that the step brings. It's extrinsic value. It's external value. It's value to us regardless of what the step actually, specific to what the step actually accomplishes. When you look at a step chart like this, what you're going to see and what you're going to realize is that all of the extrinsic value happens here when we get to B. But in fact, steps have intrinsic value, regardless of whether, say, a customer likes it better and uses it more because of our completion of B. Every one of these actually provides intrinsic value to us as the makers of the software. There are at least three ways in which that value is accomplished. The first one is this. Did you see how I interrupted myself in order to unsuccessfully turn off this damn phone a minute ago? Well, the ability to be interruptible is extremely important. For instance, at the end of your day today, I know some of you are already past the end of your day, and some of you are just smack dab in the middle of the afternoon. But at the end of your day, at the very least, I'm hoping that you will get some rest tonight. And here's what you're doing when you're resting. You're not working on my damn problem. Well, actually, you are kind of in the background, but you know what I mean. You are interruptible. If one of your, I have the door closed so my two annoying little kittens won't come in and screw up my setup. But when my kittens run in on me and I'm working and interrupt me, I need to be cool with that because my life is full of interruptions. When my colleague pings me on Slack and says, hey, can you give me a couple minutes with this? I need some love. I'm cool with that because I'm interruptible. The problem with this long stretch is that it's not interruptible. If you interrupt it, where do you fall back to? You fall back to A. There are periodic bursts out on the internet of developers enraged because they cannot get 7 straight hours of focused concentration to themselves. Yeah, well, the reason you need those 7 hours is because you've chosen a step that goes that far. If you hadn't chosen that 7-hour step, you wouldn't be in that situation. That's what I mean with interruptibility. Second, intrinsic value. Steerability. What I mean by that is, in order to have this guy go from A to B, you have to have essentially complete confidence all along the way that B is what you want. On the other hand, with these little steps, I can take a step that holds same or better, and then I can take another step in a completely different area, in a completely different direction. Why is that so important to us? Well, this may not have happened to all of you, but to a great many of us, I've had organizations come to me and say, all very good that you're on your way towards B, but here's the thing. If you can get C done by 2 weeks from today, we will close a $350 million deal. It changed their mind. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but our customers change their mind all the time. They change their mind. And when they change their mind, what they need to be able to do is steer. And steerability and interruptibility are, of course, very closely related. But essentially, every one of these points is a point at which we can steer. And for exactly the same reason, because I haven't done this yet. I haven't started this yet. And I am at a ready point. I'm ready. I'm shippable now just because I got to this dot. It may not make us to be. In fact, it certainly won't make us to be. That's obvious. But we don't care. Same or better. This is the magic of same or better in action. If you now want me to charge like hell towards C, I can do it. And I can do it cheerfully without a lot of stress. Because every point at which we have one of those step marks is a point at which we could steer. Of course, sometimes the steering comes from us. It comes from suddenly discovering that the library that you thought for sure could handle the load that you're putting on it actually can't. It comes from finding bugs in old work. It comes from new releases becoming very important. It comes from the places where somebody bought the damn brochure instead of actually checking whether the thing actually worked. I know that any of you who've been in this game for any length of time have had all of those experiences and probably even worse ones. What's a third intrinsic value of taking a step? Steps provide juice. Steps motivate. Steps give you a little bit of dopamine. Boom, 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 boom. I'm guessing I have some test-driven developers in the room, and you will know exactly what I'm talking about. You ever do that? You ever run the tests? It's green, and here's what you do. You don't change anything. You run them again. It's green. Run it again. You haven't changed anything. You've run the test 3 times in a row. It's 3 times green, and each time you're like, that's the dopamine hitting you. That's completion. Completion is enormously valued. Notice, by the way, when we talked about bandwidth, our limiting factor was the humans. When we talk about motivation, we talk about juice. The limiting, not the limiting factor, the promoting factor, the value factor is once again humans. When I work on this, I get my juice when I get to B. Can't have your pudding if you don't eat your meat. Here, I get my juice every one of these dots once again. So steps have enormous intrinsic value. One more flaw. And to some extent, I think I've already covered this, and I'm not going to draw you a picture anymore. I am changing my picture. Here we go. To some extent, I've already touched on this, but the bottom line is that RAT does not fit the reality of the market or the problem. Think of these 3 situations. 1, you get to the market and the market isn't there anymore. If you've ever been on a long-winded project, you know how that goes. Somebody scoops you. They get in the field before you, 3 months before you, 6 months before you. The market you thought you had is gone. Or you get to the market and it's still there, but the close factors aren't what you thought they were. Another way to think of it, Pareto principle, right? You've invested massive amount of effort into pleasing 20% of your users while you ignored the 80% of your users. And you didn't do this because you were being rude. You did it because you did not know how they were going to respond to your stuff. So you get to the market's still there, but you're not winning because you haven't actually satisfied the people you thought you were going to satisfy. Third one, this one is just a retake of what we said before. You're on your way to the market, but off a little bit to the side is a market that's just as good. A vein that's just as rich or even richer, but slightly different. I saw this, almost 20 years ago. I saw this with a company that marketed diff software, very sophisticated diff software. And over time, what they gradually realized was that the market for diffs, which they thought had to do with programmers and other textual analysts, was perfect for lawyers. Because lawyers take contracts through revision after revision after revision after revision. And they need excellent tools for marking up the differences between things, for analyzing those differences, for never dropping a comma or anything like that. They love those tools. And they discovered for themselves this massive market that was on the way to the original market they thought they were headed for. So in every one of those cases, the reality is that rework avoidance does not fit the market. There's one more issue, and it isn't about a negative case. It's actually about a positive case. You can't tell if you're winning unless you're in the field. You can't win without being in the field, and you can't correct without being in the field. So anything that gets me partial value from the field immediately and lets me adjust what I'm doing is a huge win in the modern marketplace. Okay, so that's a lot of whining about why rework avoidance theory isn't so successful. Then what advice might I be able to give you for ways to think differently? And I want to say, I understand I didn't prove anything to you here today, but that was not my mission. My mission is to make a plausible case for taking many more, much smaller steps with less rice and more garlic. First of all, reframe every thought you have about building software instead as a thought you have about changing software. There are three factors when we change software that dramatically affect how those changes go. One is what I call control. One is what I call expression. And one is what I call confirmation. To maximize our ability to change software, we have to say this: I can't change anything I don't control. I don't know if you've ever worked in a code base that had, let's say, raw SQL spread out across hundreds and hundreds of classes. I have. And here's the problem. When they release a new version that has a feature you want, and you upgrade that version, because you don't have control, you haven't isolated the part of the code that is your code from the part of the code that is their code, your change ability goes to hell. Because if that upgrade breaks anything you've already done, you're in big trouble. So when we talk about control, it's mostly a structural or artifactual effect of how we develop our code. Are we leaving enough isolation? Are we leaving too much, which occasionally happens as well? I'll give you an example. If you're a test-driven developer, nobody ever fakes string. Why not? Well, because you know what? String works and it's stable. It's actually, for most modern programming languages, it's one of the most stable parts of their whole environment, because a string is the first thing you do after you do an int. So nobody ever isolates themselves from that. On the other hand, people who do not isolate themselves from raw SQL are in for a great deal of pain when they go to try to change whatever it is that they're doing. So that's the control aspect. What about the expression aspect? Control says you can't change what you don't control. Expression says you can't change what you don't understand, right? If I look at a 300-line, 15 nested, multiple loop, multiple try-catch function, and I don't understand what it does, I can't change it. In fact, the first thing I have to do when I encounter that, and I work in legacy and I like working in legacy, but the first thing you do in that circumstance is precisely bring it to your understanding. So I can't change what I don't own. I can't change what I don't understand. And I can't change what isn't there. More correctly, I can change anything accidentally that was already there. And confirmation is this third aspect, and it's this whole aspect that says you need to know exactly what A does in order to honor the same or better concept. If you don't know what the same is, you can't guarantee it's the same. So you can see when you start thinking along these lines, we start saying, reframe every thought away from build. Folks, we don't build buildings. We don't go off to a green field and build a gigantic building and spend 2 years on the project and then everybody moves in and we go home. That's not what we do. I don't know when the last time you shipped a major release was, but the last time you did you all then take 3 weeks off? Did you all stop changing software at that point? Did you all move on to another project? Now, all of those things can happen, and they occasionally do happen, but only occasionally. Mostly what happens is, depending upon your environment, you either immediately start working on 1.1 or you immediately start doing hot fixes. That's the truth. That's the truth of the trade. You know I'm not making that up. So reframing around the idea that my job is making changes to existing software. My job is not building buildings in greenfield. It's changing software in brownfield. And if you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to start thinking much more about how do I get control? How do I ensure that my expression is excellent? And how can I confirm exactly what same or better consists of? Another little piece of advice. Adopt a bias for action. Most of us were raised to think that the best thing to do was to start by sitting down and thinking really, really hard before we take a step. But this model actually says, no, actually you shouldn't. You should take a step and then look and see where it got you to. That's what I mean when I say adopt a bias for action. Another key aspect then of this advice, sort for step size over value differential. Something like this. When I'm trying to decide what it is that I want to do, I'm here, and there are all these different choices. And this radius around here that I'm drawing is the size of the step. And what I'm suggesting that you do here, don't do anything bigger than your step size, ever. Never try bigger than your step size. Take any guy who's smaller than your step size and go for it and try again. Now, interestingly enough, you actually already do this all the time. And when you cross a busy road, you're doing that. When you drive down the street, you're doing that. You don't plot out your way. I bet everybody in here could easily, instantly point to me, where is the place where I could go buy a 6-pack of beer right now? Right? Probably, if you're actually in the New York area, you might say, where's the nearest bodega? If you're like me down in Virginia, where's the 7-Eleven? Or I live out in the country, where's the country store? But I bet mine is right there. It's about 2 miles that away. I never go straight there because the first thing I would encounter is a 40-foot drop off of a 90% grade because I live up on a hill. And then about a quarter of a mile beyond that, I would cross a river that's about, not monstrous, maybe 30 feet wide and 10 feet deep at its deepest. And you get the idea. The reality is I'm constantly making decisions. Some of them I plan out in advance, like I almost never go diving over the cliff. But some of them I don't. And what I do is I use, what's the word for it? Fisheye lens. I focus my attention and my love on these steps that are well inside my step size. And I don't take steps that are outside my step size. So when I say step size, what step sizes am I talking about? Well, I got two of them for you. When I'm talking about product, I'm talking about stories. I don't do stories that are bigger than 2 team days of effort. Now it's important that you understand 2 team days, because that's actually one of the other pieces of advice. Swarm your problems. Don't isolate them and hand them off to individuals and send them their separate ways. Bring all the people together that you need to solve this story and have them all work together until this story is shippable. That's a really important piece of that advice. But the larger concept is the equivalent of, where was I? Lost myself. Wow, I totally lost that thread. Oh, well, we're almost done with this talk. 2 more things and then we're done. Learn change enabling technique. You know, in code, down in the code, there are things you can do to make your change go better. Above all, of course, I would recommend adopting test-driven development. Microtest TDD is a huge change enabling technique. Second, I would recommend you pay a lot more attention to keeping axes sharp. I see way too many teams who are essentially using Notepad to edit million line programs. I see it constantly. And I say, well, you know, as a professional, you might be interested in obtaining some professional tools. And if you can't obtain them by buying them, then you might be interested in making some. They're actually easier to make than most people think they are. So worry about axe sharpening. That's what we call that, axe sharpening, right? Apocryphal story, Abe Lincoln said, if I had 6 hours to chop down this tree, I'd spend the first 2 hours sharpening my axe. And that's a really important aspect of this idea. The third change enabling technique, massive collaboration. The more you collaborate, the better you'll do at change. Hey, that's the thread I was working on before. Swarming your stories, collaborate actively. The step size for stories is 2 team days. In code, when I'm actually live coding towards a particular task that's part of my story, my step size varies between about 15 minutes and about 45 minutes. Somewhere around the 35-minute mark, I work in Kotlin. Somewhere around the 35-minute mark, I start getting tense. And I start noticing, this step is outside of my mental reach. And maybe I push just a little more. But of course, mostly what I do is I just throw it away. What did I lose? I lost 30 minutes. Big deal. I didn't lose anything but the typing of 30 minutes. Because of course, mostly what that 30 minutes did was it helped me understand the problem better. Rework avoidance says never press the same keys twice, too. But I'll tell you, I don't care about typing. I'm a good typist. I'm not worried about having to type something in that I already typed in before. Unless my step size is so big that I'm throwing away 5,000 lines of code. Then I care about it a very great deal, which brings us back to keep those steps tiny. My last bit of advice, and then I'm done. Take change harvesting seriously. Change harvesting is the theory that I've been using this whole time in the background to talk you through this and to talk me through it. And it says that successful change, be it changing code or changing product, or even changing organizations, changing individuals, has 5 properties. And if we focus on those 5 properties, we're much more likely to succeed in our changes. Human, as opposed to procedural. That is to say, focus our efforts on constructing changes that heighten human strengths and diminish human weaknesses. Local, well, obviously this whole talk is about locality. Keep everything in the neighborhood. We use a mantra, easiest, nearest alley first. fix the easiest problem that is within range of you to fix, and then move on to another one. That's about locality. Orientation is what explained in that very first picture. I'm not going to put it up again. That very first picture is what explained the fact that the steps kind of move back and forth around that central line. If you overlaid the rat and the change harvesting, that's what makes you so sure that change harvesting is inefficient, even though it isn't. It's orientating. What you're doing is, with orientation, you take a step and then you turn once again to face your target. And then you take a step and you turn once again to face your target. That's what orienting is. Human, local, oriented. Taken means change what's there. Take the change from the place where you're making the change. This keeps us from a couple things. With humans, it keeps us from forcing people to do things they don't want to do. And it keeps us from missing brilliant solutions that are actually already in place because we think we're better than the other people are at their jobs. In code, it's all about the refactoring, where we take the code that's already there and we transform it. We don't just write a whole new thing. We take what is there and we transform it. So we got human, local, oriented, taken, and the last one, iterative. Iterative is exactly the opposite of rework avoidance. Iterative says change a thing, then change it again, then change it again, then change it again. Why? Well, because of all the flaws we just talked about in rework avoidance theory. Because rework avoidance theory costs us so much in terms of our ability to actually ship software for a living. So, in conclusion, and then we can talk about this in discussion if you guys like. In conclusion, 1, that's too much rice. 2, that's not enough garlic. And 3, take many more, much smaller steps. Cool. I'm GeePaw. Amitai, how do we want to wrap this up, buddy?
Well, I have some questions that
Uh-oh.
were written in the chat, and the first one asked to save for later, so it's later, and then the other one came just now. So we can start with those from the chat, and then if it turns into a little more back and forth, and we can manage that with this group size, then cool. And we can give that 15 minutes or so. Does that sound good? Max?
Sounds good.
Cool.
I know we're
Okay.
pushing everybody's time.
Yeah, anybody who needs to leave, please feel free. We didn't give like an end to when this was going to end. If you need to
And the
go,
problem
go.
with me, well, I don't have any beer, so I probably couldn't go all night, but I bet I could go like 3 hours more. Because once you get me started, I just don't stop.
Dig it. So let me get you started because that was just the beginning. The first question was from Samuel Pessa, and I will, well, Samuel, do you want to ask it or should I read it for you?
Hi, Sam. It's nice to see you.
Yeah. Let me start the video. Nice to see you too. Yeah, I think my main problem is I have a huge legacy project, and there are so many dependencies, and I know that even getting rid of some of the dependencies first will result in something worse and not same or better.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I struggle most with at the moment.
Do you, I wonder what limits we face there between or around a level of trust, right? Sometimes my customers don't trust my team because they have no reason to. And what we wind up having to do is very slowly build trust in a growing spiral. That circumstance is always very challenging. I think it's challenging for everybody. But I mean, it's really easy for me to get pissy about about my customers not believing me when I say this will be better. But the reality is, most of the time, they're not stupid. What's happened to them is they've been through a long life of believing people who weren't actually trustworthy. And unfortunately, the rat sets them up for that over and over again because of the size of the steps that are taken.
So your suggestion is to, if you have a certain level of trust with your customers, to tell them, hey folks, I don't exactly know how long this will take. I don't exactly know how much it will cost, but I will go that direction. Let's have a look at it every 2 weeks or every week.
Yeah, I would typically say even smaller than that. I bet I could show you an impact in a few days. It would be a teeny tiny impact, but I bet I could show you one. Sometimes what I do, I don't know, maybe this has corrupted me. Sometimes what I do is I go and I actually work out the code in some detail and study the code and see, am I sure that I can make this change in 2 days that will provide a little tiny benefit? And if I am, then I'll go to my customer and say, nope, you just got to trust me. You just got to trust me. I guarantee the worst thing that will happen is that you lose 2 days of me, not even of the whole team, just me.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. What else we got?
We got another question. Next in order was Martin. Hopefully I'm saying that okay.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Martin.
Oh, great. Hi, Mike, I think. Thanks for a great talk. Also, would like to take this opportunity to thank you for all your nice tweets. Your musings, also the music you put up and all the wisdom you put in these large tweeting threads. People read them,
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad people do.
Yeah, so with regards to the interruptibility, I really like your 15 to 45 minutes individual step size. And I would like to know how you came to like a 2 team days step size for teams, because that doesn't compute to me. Of course, depends on the team and I can try it out and, adjust. But what made you think 2 days are good?
So I always say 2 days, and the truth is, in my head, it's really 1 day and a half. but the biggest problem that I experience in getting folks to adopt that kind of thing is their belief that every step they take must improve the customer's experience. I understand that there is a great deal of mythology based around the idea that those wacky programmers don't actually care about the customers and they get distracted and they do incredibly stupid things that no one wanted or asked for. That's kind of the opposite of the mythology that says customers are greedy and stupid and venal. It's that's all myth that has grown out of rework avoidance theory and the impact that it's had on our trade, which has been horrific, frankly. And I mean, to give you an example of something kind of like this, have you ever seen a customer pile up 75,000 requirements?
Not that much, but
I have.
Whoa.
And the reason they do that is because they know there will never be a second chance. And the reason they know that is because they have never had a second chance. And the reason they have never had a second chance is because we were not prepared to change our code. This is one of these ways where rework avoidance theory hangs together as a big cluster of related concepts, and they all sort of support each other. And stepping out of that world, what you get with change harvesting is a whole bunch of related concepts that support each other. And the reality is that if a customer had a second swing, they'd probably take it because they'd rather get to the market first anyway. But instead, we build these sort of mythological distinctions. My customer is too stupid to understand my code. My programmer is too stupid to understand my market, and so on and so forth. And it's only because we're making it that way. If we didn't make it that way, it wouldn't be that way. So going back to your actual question about how do you get down to 2 days? Well, I get down to 2 days by increasing trust and by showing people the techniques they need to have in order to actually collaborate with each other successfully and actually technically make useful changes on that small a scale and letting them grow over time. Because the thing is, you can't really insta switch from rework avoidance theory to change harvesting, because doing that is a change like any other change. It's too big a change to take in one swallow. Instead, we do what I do for a living, which is turn all the knobs a little, all the knobs a little, all the knobs a little, right? I'm never able to take any one knob and say, crank this baby up to 11. Instead, it's this constant game of tweaking, 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 tweaking. That's the only way you will ever get to that 2-day limit. Now, God, 15 years ago, I came across teams who actually did sprints in a day. They did a planning, they did refinement, they did execution, they did QA, they did a retro every single day. And I swear to you, I thought they were lying until I saw them do it. And what I discovered was that they did this by breaking out work that was smaller than a day. And by having customers who trusted them, and by taking their time and explaining to each other and making each other as strong as possible as geeks, that's how they pulled it off.
Thanks. Awesome.
Cool.
Follow-up clarification from Zeb, which was, are the 2 team days and the individual 45 minutes steps different kinds of steps?
Yeah. And the reason is because my team is so much, my swarm is usually significantly smaller than my team. If you do mobbing all the time, then they sort of approach each other. Realistically, most organizations do not mob all the time. And, my mobs tend to be me, another developer, a QA person, and intermittently a product owner, little bundles of 4 of us. And we try to get down to that 45-minute limit when we're collaborating together. But the larger team might have 8 developers, and the PO is rotating around between them, and 4 QA people. And so you kind of have to smush. I totally get you that the math doesn't directly add up in any simple way. And I would definitely say a mistake I have seen many teams make is to actually try to plot out the 45-minute segments when they do their planning. I think a fair number of us have seen the 7,000 item JIRA subtasking. But, on the upside, at least now I can do decimal points. Why? Who thought that was something we needed? I don't know. I don't know. Tripping. People are tripping. Okay, what else we got?
We have one more queued from Dave Schenkel. Dave, you there?
Yeah. So one of the debates you get on Teams, whether it's an XP shop or not, is the small stories. So how small can you go? If you go too small, the story might not be public facing, so the customer might not see it. And you'll get developers saying, well, that's too small. We should go larger. Then you have developers saying that's too large. We should go smaller. So what do you on value to the outside versus the inside? What are your opinions on making things small?
I'm on the inside, and I value the inside. And this is actually really what I was talking about when I said um, same or better has to be my bottom line. Now, of course, what I want is I want my teams to be creative enough and my product owner to be creative enough and for them both to be friendly enough to the idea that they're going to get another swing, that we can actually bring the stories down under 2 days. But when push comes to shove, I don't break the 2-day limit. I say, well, then you're going to get a story done. It's going to do this and this and this, and the customer is not going to be delighted. Because what I've found is that as soon as I start pushing to that 4, I just get in trouble. I just, that 4-day story, it kills me over and over and over again. I cannot tell you how many teams I work with routinely who routinely deliver 100% of their stories 80% done. And that makes me crazy, and it makes every product owner I've ever met in life crazy. Nobody wants that. All of us universally would prefer to have 80% of our stories 100% done. It is possible to get better at doing those splits, at splitting stories, at reducing the weight. However, you have to, what you have to do in order to do that is throw out the fear of rework. Classic example, the one I often use in illustration is the login page. I don't know, the last login page I had must have had 70 features on it. There was the graphics here, there was the remember me functionality, there was the reset my password functionality, there was a this and the that and the other. You know what they needed? This is my email address. This is my password. Go. And then, of course, they're shocked and appalled that I would even suggest. I'm like, you know what? They don't need that today. Today, what they need is the ability to identify themselves to our system. Tomorrow, depending upon what you like most, I can make it more attractive. I can let you do password resets. I can let you remember me. I can put a cookie out. But what they need today is, this is my email. This is my password. But the only way that makes sense is if UX, product, front end, and back end, all 4 accept that they will have to change something they've already done.
Cool, thanks.
It's been 15 minutes, but we have a perfect closing question. So I'm going to stretch our deadline. This one is from Christoph. Christoph, you there?
Yeah, I'm there. No nice background for me. I hope that's okay for you. I have a question. How do I help someone go from red to CHT to change harvest theory? Because for some people, they are that deeply entrenched in red that every proposition I make that I now learned about change harvest theory from you seems ridiculous. And or very, very hard to understand. And do you have some help? Can you offer some advice on how to go there?
So the number one issue for all coaching, in my view, is this: create experiences, not arguments, right? Instead of trying to reason them into doing it, what I want to do is create an experience for them that lets them see some piece of it in play and actually get it under their fingers and see how that goes. Now, on a particular team, you know, who knows what that experience will be. But the most common thing that I would do is in a TDD context where I'm trying to show them something about test driving or about refactoring. What I'll actually do is say, look, give me 15 minutes every day. Call it fast talk with GeePaw. And it's mandatory for the first 2 weeks. And then I say, otherwise, go on about your business. And what I do during that time is I go find places in the code and manipulate the code in order to illustrate improvements, rapid improvements, in order to set up a side-by-side before and after, which then during those 15 minutes, I just show them the before and after. We talk about it. I always say 15 minutes because it's really important as a coach that you honor that the people that you're working with work for a living, and they don't have 40 hours to give you. They have a few minutes to give you if you smile. And so I always say 15. They very often go from anywhere from occasionally 15 to 35 or 45 minutes, because of course what happens is they start getting into it. Now, that's a very technical level, and it's a very slow way to change things. But you know what? Changing a team isn't really that different from changing code. It's all got to be stepwise. It's all got to require patience. And I need stories that are short enough I can actually pull them off. Stories about the change in process, not just stories about code, right? And so because of that, it's kind of like I don't have any choice. Yeah, you know, some ships turn slow, some ships turn really fast, but teams always turn very slowly, very slowly. And patience is probably the #1 attribute of anybody who would be a coach. And I noticed a little bit more. Find example. Jess says, find examples. Hi, Jess, you made it. I'm glad your machine, you probably just switched machines, didn't you? You find examples in their code. That is critical. That is critical. The #1 best thing to do is to find it in their day job, no matter what you're doing, whether you're sculpting new stories or refactoring code or bringing something under test. If you can do it in their world, much, much more power. Another thing, because I'm a coach and I'm well paid to do this, right? Another thing I'll do is I'll go solve a problem offline so that I know with certainty how to solve it. And then I'll say, let's mob. This is what I want to try. What do you guys say? And of course, because I happen to have already done it 4 hours ago, I happen to know exactly what is needed to do it right now. In the beginning, especially with teams, it's very important not to lead them into dead ends. You want to show them a little bit of frustration, right? But you don't want to show them the kind of frustration that you as a pro are capable of encountering. You want to show them the kind of frustration that's like, yeah, that looks like a problem, but look, what if we did this? What if we did that? I've seen way too many teams ruined by being sent off to test drive something that none of us in this room would be prepared to TDD. Not one of us. It's like, yeah, no, what? You sent them to do what? They're going to get lost in the woods in the next 30 seconds and they're never going to come back. Again, as a coach, I'm pretty corrupt. I'm perfectly willing to engineer wins. And the reason isn't because I'm so evil, really. It's because, you know what? One of the biggest differences between winning teams and losing teams is winning teams know they're winning. Isn't that a weird thing? You think to yourself, no, you only get to know you're winning if you've actually won. But no, as a matter of fact, teams that are about to win know they're winning. Teams that feel good about themselves and what they're doing do better. So I have no qualms setting up those rigs and making that happen. And I do it all the time.
We just got
Thanks.
2 fabulous examples. One example that we just got was avoiding the rework avoidance theory. you will go and solve a problem just to know that you can and how, and then toss it and go and mob and let them do it again. Modeling behavior, very nice. And then the second example you just gave was stretching 15 minutes into 20 as it happened. Nice. This guy lives what he talks about. He's not full of crap. This is really how it works. So we're going to wrap up here. GeePaw, thank you for coming. And we will have this video uploaded, network permitting, probably about an hour from now. I will post that to the meetup. So if you were on this event, you will see that link. And then I will also post an announcement within the next few days for our next meetup, which will be more Java specific, as promised. But I hope this was great. It looks like everybody says that it was great, so it could be great. I think it was great. Thanks
Thank you
everyone for
all.
coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. You know how to find me. I'm on Twitter. I got my website. Ping me. All right. We can talk about any of this stuff more as needed. Cool. Thanks a lot.